Independent Republican Mike Graham right here at TalkTV. Coming up at midday, of course, it is Prime Minister's Questions, the return after the Easter recess. Parliament has reconvened and Sir Keir Starmer will be up against Rishi Sunak. What will they argue about? What will they talk about? They should be talking about the migrant crisis. They should be talking about the economy, no doubt. They should be talking about the striking doctors and the NHS and its failings. And Keir Starmer apparently has been banging on about the fact that the NHS is broken. Yeah, it was broken by the NHS. Thanks very much indeed. So no doubt I'll be banging on about that, but we shall see. Right now, though, it's time to talk to Cindy Yu, Assistant Editor of The Spectator, presenter of the Our Chinese Whispers podcast as well, because let's face it, here we have a situation in the UK where we talk about TikTok all the time, we do talk about spyware, we talk about malware, we talk about whether there are national security concerns around Russia and around China as well. And let's find out exactly where we are right now, because there's been all sorts of security alert threats, all sorts of worries. Ian Duncan-Smith has slammed the United Kingdom for weakness after the Chinese threat was, the warning was made. Cindy, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning.
Thanks very much for joining us. It seems to be an interesting time at the moment in terms of the way that Britain's relationship with China is going. We've got Ian Duncan-Smith, who is, of course, one of those Conservative MPs who was put on a list of people who were not welcome in China. We've got TikTok being banned from use inside of the parliamentary estate, pretty much, particularly on official government phones. Worries that China is using TikTok as a sort of commercial lever, if you like, into the security systems of the UK. Is China a threat to the UK?
I mean, I think James Cleverly put it quite well today as Foreign Secretary when he said that we don't identify any of our bilateral relationships with just one word. So I think, you know, in some ways this is a bit of a semantic argument. Of course, there are certain areas in which China is threatening, but then there are also areas in which that we do have to work with China. And I think fundamentally what we're seeing is that for the first time since the end of the Cold War, the last few decades where the Americans have had this kind of unipolar moment, there is a challenger. There's a challenger on the horizon, and that's what we in the West have to deal with. So, you know, I think to some extent this is just semantics.
Yes, and what about the TikTok arguments? Because obviously the US have sort of picked up on some of the TikTok problems in government as well. And TikTok, of course, is a commercial organisation, but it is said to be more or less hooked into, if you like, the Chinese Communist Party. It seems a bit ridiculous to say you can't have it on a government phone, but you can have it on your own phone.
Well, I think I can kind of see the reasoning behind it. I mean, I have to say I'm not a technical expert on this. I'm not a cybersecurity expert. But in my understanding, the idea is that apps like TikTok, just like Instagram and most of our social media apps, collect a huge amount of data in your phone. Some of them seem to be able to track your activities across your apps. So even if you don't have something open, it seems like it might be able to read what, let's say, something is in your email or something like that, or at least there are concerns about that, those kinds of backdoors. So if TikTok is friendly with the Chinese Communist Party, which, by the way, that would be through its parent company, ByteDance, which is the technical company here, and we don't have a smoking gun here to say that they do share that data. But the worry is, of course, that the Chinese Communist Party can lean on any Chinese companies and get the data that they want. So if you're James Cleverly or Ian Duncan-Smith and you've got, you know, classified information on your government phones, then yeah, I think it probably is a good idea to not have TikTok on there. But for ordinary citizens, you know, we have to think about how much of our data we want to give away on social media anyway. So I think, you know, unless you do work in government, it probably...
Yes, indeed. I mean, one of the things that I suppose you should be concerned about if you're in government is what has been said by the National Security Cyber Security Centre boss, which is a woman called Lindy Cameron, who said that the West faces an epoch-defining challenge from China, as if it's somehow leading up to a point at which, you know, security is in peril in some way.
Yes, those words are directly lifted out of the updated integrated review, which is the government's overall strategy for foreign policy, which obviously had a huge chunk on China in it. So I think she's kind of going along with Rishi Sunak's line there. But as I say, you know, it is clearly an epoch-defining challenge. We haven't had a challenge like this in the West since the end of the Cold War. I thought it was very interesting that Lindy Cameron also talked about how China doesn't want parity on technology, it wants supremacy. And I think that is also true. And that that's been clearly been the case ever since that China's economy has started, coming on in leaps and strides, and afford to invest in the technologies and the science that we in the West want to be good at as well. So it is a second arms race on this front, a technology race.
Other interesting stories this week have included one in Times in which a Chinese businessman linked to the Tory party and fundraising dinners supposedly was running an operation in Croydon, it is alleged, which was a sort of overseas Chinese police station. I mean, these stories are quite remarkable, aren't they?
Very remarkable if it is proven true. And I think we have to be very careful to say that these are just allegations at the moment. It seems like the man in question has admitted that he was running some kind of consulate service for renewing passports out of his own company, a deal struck up with a local authority in China, which the Chinese side have said that these are police stations. So there's a lot of question marks over exactly what is happening in this Croydon outlet. But yes, I read that Times story very, very carefully. And I think that if he had broken any laws, if he's a spy of some sort, I think we would hear more from people like Lindy from these secret services on, whether or not he is a spy. But I think a lot of it at the moment is allegations.
Right.
And it's very hard to comment on just how much of a threat this is, considering it's a lot of it is smoke rather than any particular fire that we've seen.
I mean, it may be that it's not necessarily a threat in any way to UK security, but it's just a sort of I suppose it's just an oddity if you've got somebody operating as a private individual, but sort of operating for a state, because if he's not doing anything illegal, why not just do it out of the embassy?
Yes, well, precisely. If all he was doing was renewing passports, then surely the embassy can do that. Yeah. I have to say, as someone who has got a few Chinese visas over the last five or so years, the embassy is very bad to be dealing with.
Yeah, maybe does a better fast track service. Maybe just hop down there and see how it goes.
Go to Croydon takeaway instead.
Yeah, exactly.
But
right.
I mean, jokes aside, it is very confusing, and I would hope the Home Office is on the case. I hope actually investigating what exactly this man has done, what laws are being broken here. And Mike, as you know, I'm very concerned about the reputation all of this gives to the Chinese diaspora in the UK, and I wouldn't want people to think that any Chinese takeaway they walk into is being spied on by the CCP, because that's clearly not true. So yes, let's see what actually is happening here, and the government should be investigating it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one final piece that caught my eye this week was in Unheard, written by David Rose, a piece about, because we're talking a lot this morning about Extinction Rebellion, what's likely to happen at the weekend, possibly with a direct sort of action against the London Marathon. There's a very interesting piece in Unheard about how some people who you would regard as big bankrolls of the Extinction Rebellion movement were recently actually in China at a meeting of the Chinese Communist Party, and suggestions in the piece that, it's sort of suiting, because China's government has set up a kind of environmental committee. They talk a lot about, making the economy more green, even though, we know they're building more coal-powered fire stations every 5 minutes. But certainly there's a suggestion that, it sort of suits their purpose to see what Extinction Rebellion does here.
I have to say I haven't read that piece, so I don't know exactly what these individuals are said to have done. But yes, you're right, Mike. China is really thinking about the next stage of world development when it comes to tackling climate change. And yes, you're right that it's building new coal power plants still at home. But at the same time, it has got already an absolute lead in the renewables industry. It is already the world leading producer of wind and solar power and panels. And also its electric vehicles. I think we're going to start seeing in European showrooms very, very soon, which explains some of the subsidies that the Americans have put on their EV side. So I think, yes, absolutely, China's a big polluter, but as ever with China, it's a very complicated story, often paradoxical. It is also a world-leading renewables power. So we have to think about if tackling climate change is the way we're going down, do we end up actually building China into the supply chain much more than we realised before? Yeah, maybe so. We shall see. Cindy, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Cindy Yu, Assistant Editor, Spectator and presenter of our Chinese Whispers podcast.